Everyone debates about India crossing the 4 trillion mark and about to become the third largest economy.
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 तीसरे नंबर की इकोनॉमी बनाने की गारंटी दी है.
But what if I told you we have already surpassed that? If only we stop measuring ourselves with Western yardsticks. Recently, the Prime Minister of India remarked about measuring the economy in GEP, or gross empowerment of people.
जहां ग्रोथ सिर्फ बाजार से तय नहीं होगी, हम जीडीपी सेंट्रिक अप्रोच के बजाय जीईपी सेंट्रिक प्रोग्रेस की तरफ बढ़ रहे हैं. ग्रॉस एम्पावरमेंट ऑफ पीपल, GEP.
And Niti Aayog Vice Chairman emphasized heavily on considering purchasing power parity as a more realistic economic metric.
There's been a lot in the newspapers about our being the fourth largest economy. Those are all measured at market prices, but the real way of measuring productivity is in real terms is purchasing power parity. PPP is measuring the real size of our economy.
You may call it political leverage, but as a counter, why do we Indians have to measure our growth through the lenses of the West? What if I point out that this 4 trillion market exchange rate of GDP is only an illusion to suit the convenience of one and only the US dollar? The real metrics are sidelined because then it changes the whole paradigm of understanding economics. Here in this video, let's expose practically thinking, there should be multiple ways of measuring an economy. For example, one can be excellent in absolute technology. Let's say the technology of US or China, or the engineering of Germany and Japan. These are arguably the best in the world. No one is denying. But for example, technology efficiency or labor force at disposal, India is way higher up. That is, far more efficiently, India can integrate multiple complex technologies and use them in the most cost and energy efficient way to fetch desired results. You know it as Jugaad economics. So the question you should ask, why measure it in dollar terms when it disapproves all other parameters and just highlights only market exchange rate? As if judging a Formula 1 race not by who wins the race but who spent more money on the car. In nominal GDP, India stands at 4.2 trillion, the fourth biggest. But there is a catch, a critical one which needs your attention. See, in nominal terms, we first produce everything in rupee denomination, whether for local use or export. Then it gets converted into dollars at exchange rate, which is around rupees 85 for $1. But here is the twist. The actual cost of living and production in India is much lower. Let's say a loaf of bread costs $2 in the US. The same loaf around rupees 40 in India, which simplifies as $1 equals to 20 rupees. That is the purchasing power parity or PPP. It is the ability of the currency to function in its own term independently within an open economy. And based on that, India's economy is not just 4 trillion, it is massive at 17 trillion. And this isn't some fringe opinion, this is IMF data. Yet despite its realism, PPP is often sidelined. Why? Because it shakes the current economic hierarchy. Now, if a country whose economy and cash flows are mostly dependent on selling products in the dollar-dominated West, then for them, the nominal GDP is fine, howsoever overvalued it may be. But for India, 70% of our GDP is for domestic consumption. It is a blessing in disguise. We aren't dependent on the dollar trail. However, we do interact and trade with the world in 30% share of our GDP. Hence, just to clarify, we are not a closed economy, but our domestic demand is just enormous. Now just to validate that 30%, our 100% is downgraded. That is the fallacy. So in real purchasing terms, India is already the third largest economy at 17 trillions, but it's inconvenient for them to accept. The dollar is inflated. Here is the proof. To build 1 megawatt of thermal power, India spends $1 million, whereas US spends $4 million. Same electricity, same megawatt, but India's cost is 1/4 that of the West. So hitting the same question, why nominal GDP is the accepted term? To understand that, we need to realize globalization is nothing but over-appreciation of the dollar. In theory, it is an interconnected world, but in practice, it is the dollar who remains the largest consumer, despite having huge revenue deficit. But how? Asset conquest model is designed in such a way that only they will have the purchasing clout to buy out your goods and services, make you dollar dependent, then inflate the dollar, reduce other asset values, then buy out your companies, stocks, natural resources, land, gold, intellectual properties at discounted prices. This is the loop. This is the way of Neo-Colonization after World War II, all done through the weaponization of dollar. And you are told it is free trade. Colonization didn't end. Now the instrument is dollar and not gunpowder. Have you come across any popular metric which exposes the deep fault lines of the Western dollarized world? For example, like how much of natural resources were depleted and carbon emissions generated to develop the mega cities of the West. Isn't environment a burning issue in today's date? So next time when you hear 4 trillion, just ask 4 trillion in whose eyes, at whose cost, and by whose rules?